I think it's a tragedy that this operation had to happen, but after 1,000 missiles being fired from Gaza into the Israeli civilian population over the last year, and a build-up of 120 in a short period of time, I don't think the Israeli Defence Forces had any choice other than to mount the operation. I've been impressed by the accuracy of the intelligence that supported the operation, and by the extreme accuracy of Israeli surgical strikes into Gaza. And from Israeli figures, it appears that of the 177 people that they killed in Gaza, around 120 were engaged in terrorism, which is a high number, I think. Every civilian casualty is a great tragedy, but unfortunately when you're fighting an enemy like Hamas, which uses the civilian population to shield itself and hides behind the civilian population, this is an unfortunate outcome, and the only choice is to allow them to carry on hammering their rockets into Israel.
After Operation Cast Lead, you were out there countering lots of the propaganda against Israel, against the way the IDF acted. How did you see, first of all, the way the media, in general, the world related to this operation?
Well, I felt that the media coverage on the whole was more positive this time round than it was during Operation Cast Lead. And I think in particular the international diplomatic response was much stronger in support of Israel, and especially from the United Kingdom and from the United States, but other countries as well. So I think that the level of support for this and the level of sympathy for Israel and the understanding of what Israel had done was pretty good.
How do you explain that?
Well, I think the case was put more strongly and more clearly by Israel this time around, I think. And I've no doubt that behind the scenes a lot of diplomatic effort went in by Israel to explain. And we know that, for example, that there was a gathering of international diplomats here in Israel before the operation was launched, no doubt to explain what may happen and the reasons why.
So what was the main message you were trying to convey back then? What does the world have to understand about what Israel's dealing with trying to fight these kind of terrorist organizations?
Well, I found over a number of years that the international media, many human rights organizations and many politicians around the world, with exceptions in all areas, but on the whole, apply double standards to Israel compared to the standards they apply to other nations. And let's just take an example of that. When Israel killed Jabari, the Hamas leader, at the start of this campaign, there was a very significant outcry against that. Only yesterday, NATO announced that it killed 3 terrorist leaders in Afghanistan. I have seen no comment on that, and certainly no outcry. So I think that's an illustration, among many others I could mention, of the double standards that are applied.
Now, you were a commander of the forces in Afghanistan. You see the American forces also working throughout the world. How would you compare?
There are a great number of similarities between the way that Israel and the United States, and to an extent Great Britain, conducts counter-terrorist operations. And one area of comparison, I think, is targeted killings, where the United States carries out extensive attacks using drone strikes against Al-Qaeda and Taliban leaderships in the border areas of Pakistan. That is because those individuals, those people, those networks represent a clear and present threat to the United States and the Western world, a threat of terrorism.
Some people say these target killings, they don't do anything because they give motivation for another person to come instead of the person who was killed. How do you feel that it is important, it is effective?
Of course, any time you attack a terrorist group of extremists, whether you do it from the air, whether you do it on the ground, of course the destruction and death can motivate people to support them, and often does. But you have to balance that motivation against just allowing them to carry on their terrorist plots. And so far, US and British anti-terrorist action against Al-Qaeda and other nations has succeeded in containing Al-Qaeda. And actually Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan is now very much on the run and barely able to survive because of these targeted killings. And I compare what Israel has done to Hamas to those operations. I think the targeted killing of Hamas's leadership has done untold damage to Hamas. They will be replaced, they will cause anger, but this is what happens in a war.
So while they're talking about shaheeds and suicide bombing, these commanders of these terrorist organizations They're running for their lives.
They're certainly running for their lives. They're running for their lives in the Pakistan border areas. Al-Qaeda is barely able to operate. They want to carry out attacks against the West. They can't really do so from there. And they're looking for other parts of the world, such as Somalia, such as Yemen, and various other places like Mali, to be able to launch and plan attacks. And the same applies to Hamas. Hamas talk big now. Hamas are talking victory, but that was inevitable when this started. But actually, Hamas has been very, very severely damaged, both their leadership and also their munitions. And they've also been damaged, I think, within the area they control, Gaza, where the population live under huge and brutal repression by Hamas. But they won't be very happy to have seen the destruction that Hamas has brought upon themselves to some extent in the last few days.
So today, after a few hours after the ceasefire, you feel that Israel can say that it accomplished a lot?
I believe that Israel has accomplished the mission it set out to achieve. I know there's a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of concern that perhaps Hamas has not been dealt an absolutely fatal blow, but I don't think that was ever President Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu's objective. He could have gone on to obliterate Hamas, I believe, but that would have taken a lengthy and extremely costly ground campaign to do so.
Okay, we got through this conflict with the Hamas, but the big mission is ahead, Iran.
I think one of the reasons why it was wise of Prime Minister Netanyahu not to mount a ground offensive, which could have taken many days, many weeks, and possibly even many months, was that he cannot afford, I don't believe, to be distracted from the main enemy he faces, which is Iran. Iran obviously is a principal supporter of Hamas. Iran armed Hamas. Iran encourages Hamas to attack Israel, and Iran quite likely precipitated this particular operation at this particular time. Not only would a lengthy campaign in Gaza distract the Israeli Defense Forces from their primary enemy, Iran, but also it would distract the international community. And Israel needs the international community to focus on Iran, as it's been doing very effectively, bringing sanctions that are very damaging to Iran. And I think that for that reason and many other reasons as well, I think it was probably a wise decision by the Prime Minister not to proceed to a land campaign.
Do you see a situation where the military option will be the one which will be chosen regarding Iran?
I think everything is a possibility. Iran cannot be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. If you can imagine a scenario where this Gaza conflict, and let's not forget Hamas are a proxy organization of Iran, this Gaza conflict broke out in the face of an Iranian nuclear threat and all that would do to constrain Israel's actions. I think it's essential that the Iranian nuclear mission is stopped, and it's not just for Israel's benefit also. The whole world would be affected by an Iranian nuclear capability, not least the possibility of transferring nuclear weapons for terrorist use.